Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going literally beneath the surface. We're exploring the world of submarine power cable.
Right. Not your everyday charger cable, that's for sure.
No, definitely not. These are massive, specialized cables carrying huge amounts of electricity underwater, often between, whole countries.
Exactly. And we've got a great source to guide us. The Global Submarine Power Cable Market Report 2025. It gives us a really solid, data-driven look at this whole industry.
Yeah, it looks pretty comprehensive. So our mission today is really to unpack this report for you. We want to understand where the market is right now, what's driving its growth, who the key players are, basically give you a clear picture of this critical infrastructure sector.
Sounds good. Where should we start? The numbers.
Let's start with the numbers. The report estimates the global market size for 2025 at USD 154.5 million, a pretty substantial figure.
It is. But what's really striking is the growth projection. It's expected to hit USD 453.2 million by 2033.
Wow, okay, so more than doubling in, what is that, 8 years?
Exactly. The compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, is projected at 13.00% between 2025 and 2033. That's, very strong growth.
13%. That's significant. What's behind that kind of expansion? What's fueling it?
Well, there are a couple of big things. Firstly, just the increasing global need for efficient power transmission.
Yeah.
Economies growing more demand.
Basic demand increase.
Right. But secondly, and this is a really big one, the global shift towards renewable energy.
Ah, okay, like offshore wind farms.
Precisely. Those huge installations out at sea need these sophisticated underwater cables to get the power back to the grid on land.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, so we know it's growing fast. Where is this growth happening? The report breaks it down regionally, right? Let's start with North America.
Yeah, North America actually holds the largest market share right now in 2025. Over 37% coming in at USD 644.17 million.
Over a third of the market, and the growth there.
Still strong.
Yeah.
A projected CGR of 11.4% through to 2033.
And within North America, the U.S. must be a major factor.
Oh, absolutely. The report puts the U.S. market at USD 453.25 million in 2025 with an 11.2% CAGR. A lot of that is tied directly to building out offshore wind capacity.
Right. What about Canada and Mexico?
Canada is significant too, about USD 677.30 million in 2025, and actually a slightly higher CGR, 12.2%. That seems linked to connecting islands and maybe interprovincial links.
Okay.
And Mexico is also a key part with USD 513.62 million and an 11.9% CAGR. So the whole region is pretty active.
Got it. So North America leads the pack currently. How does Europe compare?
Europe's the strong second. It accounts for over 29% of the global revenue. The market size there in 2025 is estimated at USD 423.81 million.
And the growth rate, similar to North America.
Very similar, yeah. A projected CAGR of 12%. We're seeing big investments, especially in places like the UK.
Offshore wind again, I presume?
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
The UK market is about USD 743.2 million with a 12.8% CAGR, really driven by those offshore wind targets.
And Germany, they're usually big on renewables.
Definitely. Germany's market is even larger, USD 875.91 million in 2025, with a 12.2% CAGR. Lots of government support there for renewable infrastructure.
Okay.
France is also significant, USD 406.99 million, 11.2% CAGR. And then you have Italy, Russia, Spain, the Nordics, quite a few others contributing. There's a real focus in Europe on interconnecting national grids.
Right. Sharing power across borders seems like a common theme. Okay, so North America and Europe are the big players now. But I've heard a lot about growth in the Asia-Pacific region.
You heard right. APAC holds about 24% of the market share in 2025. That's around USD 661.9%.
Okay, smaller than Europe currently.
Yes, but here's the key thing, the growth rate. The projected CAGR for APAC is 15.9%.
Well, nearly 16%. That's significantly faster than North America or Europe.
By far the fastest growing region. It's really accelerating.
And countries are leading that charge. China.
China is a huge driver, yes. USD 137.65 million hour in 2025, growing at 15.4%. A lot of that is driven by building out HVDC connections, high voltage direct current for efficient long-distance power transmission.
Okay, HVDC, we should come back to that. What about India?
India is another key one. Smaller market size currently, USD 366.11 million, but an even faster CAGR predicted, 17.8%.
Whoa!
Driven by their massive energy needs and, again, investments in offshore renewables. But it's not just China and India. Japan, South Korea, Australia, Singapore, Taiwan, Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
They're all contributing to this rapid APAC expansion.
So rapid industrialization building out infrastructure. That makes sense. Okay, so APAC is the one to watch for future growth. What about the other regions? South America, Middle East, Africa, are they significant?
They have smaller shares currently, but still showing solid growth. South America is just over 4%, about USD 579.67 million in 2025, with a 13.7% CAGR. Brazil's offshore wind plans and Argentina's connection needs are key there. The Middle East is similar, around 4% share, maybe slightly larger at USD 610.18 million, growing at 14.4%. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are the main players, likely driven by infrastructure projects and maybe future renewable links.
Interesting. And Africa.
Africa has the smallest share, around 2.2%, which is about USD 335.60 million in 2025. The CAGR is 13.3%. South Africa is a key market there, often for island and inter-country connections. So while smaller now, these regions definitely have potential.
It really sounds like a global phenomenon, this growth, just happening at different speeds. Did the report single out any particular type of project or application that's growing fastest overall?
Yes, it did. Globally, the report identifies inter-country and island connections as the fastest-growing application segment.
Ah, so building those bridges, electrically speaking.
Exactly. It really highlights that global push for more connected, resilient power grids.
Okay, that gives us a great map of the market. Let's dig a bit deeper into the why. We've touched on offshore wind and interconnection. Can you elaborate on those drivers?
Sure. Offshore wind is definitely a primary catalyst, as these farms get bigger and move further out into deeper waters.
They need longer, better cables.
Precisely. More durable, higher capacity cables. That's pushing innovation. But the cross-border grid interconnection is just as important. Countries want energy security, they want to trade power efficiently, balance out renewable generation.
Right, if it's windy in one place but not another, you can share the load.
Exactly. It makes the whole system more robust and helps integrate those variable renewable sources. It's about building a collaborative energy network.
Makes sense. And you mentioned technology advancements within the cables themselves.
Yes, the industry isn't standing still. There's constant work to boost capacity and bring down costs, like the move towards 100G wavelengths in the integrated fiber optics.
Ah, the communication lines within the power cable.
Right. They're used for control, monitoring, data. Handling more data becomes crucial for managing these complex grids securely and efficiently.
So the cables are getting smarter, essentially.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
Or at least enabling smarter grid management.
Okay, so lots of growth drivers. But it can't all be smooth sailing, right? What are the roadblocks? The restraints?
Well, the most obvious one is cost. These are incredibly expensive projects.
I can imagine. Laying cable on the seabed.
Exactly. You need specialized ships, specialized equipment, highly skilled crews. Installation is complex, and repairs, if needed, are also very costly and difficult.
And environmental hurdles.
Definitely. There are often stringent environmental regulations, getting permits, doing impact assessments, ensuring minimal disruption to marine ecosystems. It all adds time and complexity.
And these projects often cross borders, right? Does that add another layer?
It certainly does. You might be dealing with multiple countries, different legal systems, different permitting processes. Just navigating the bureaucracy and getting all the permissions can be a major challenge and cause delays.
Okay, so significant costs and regulatory complexity are the main headwinds. Let's shift to trends shaping the future. You mentioned HVDC earlier. Why is that becoming so important?
All right, high voltage direct current. This is a really key trend. For transmitting large amounts of power over very long distances underwater, HVDC is just much more efficient than traditional AC or alternating current.
Lower losses over distance.
Exactly. Significantly lower transmission losses. Plus, HVDC systems can sometimes use fewer cables, maybe just 1 or 2 conductors, compared to 3 for AC, which means less material, potentially lower cost, and a smaller footprint on the seabed.
So better for long-haul, high-power routes.
Precisely. For those big interconnector projects or linking distant offshore wind farms, HVDC is increasingly the preferred technology.
Makes sense. Any other major trends highlighted?
The report also touches on the relentless demand for faster bandwidth and internet access.
How does that connect to power cables?
Well, while it primarily drives the market for dedicated fiber optic submarine cables, remember that those fiber optic bundles are often integrated within the submarine power cables.
Sharing the same infrastructure.
Right. They often follow the same routes, use the same installation vessels. So the boom in data demand indirectly supports the ecosystem for laying all sorts of submarine cables, including power. There's a synergy there.
Interesting connection. Now, something else mentioned briefly was the impact of trade tariffs. How does that play into this market?
Yeah, the report mentions things like the Liberation Day tariffs in the U.S., affecting various sectors.
Yeah.
It specifically notes the impact on electronics due to trade tensions, particularly U.S.-China.
With tariffs on components potentially reaching quite high levels.
Yes, things like semiconductors, batteries, consumer electronics facing tariffs. This pushes up costs and can disrupt supply chains.
So how might that affect submarine power cables? They must have sophisticated components.
Well, the report doesn't draw a direct, deep line to submarine cables specifically, but it's logical to assume that tariffs on essential electronic components used in the cables themselves or in the control systems could increase overall project costs.
Right.
It adds another layer of financial risk and might cause manufacturers to look at diversifying their supply chains, shifting sourcing away from certain countries. It just makes the economic landscape more complex.
Yeah, another factor companies have to navigate. Okay, let's talk about those companies. Who are the big players actually making and installing these tables? What's the competitive scene like?
It's a pretty competitive market, but it's also somewhat concentrated. You have several large global players who really dominate.
Like who?
The report names companies like Sumitomo Electric, Prysmian, Nexans, NKT, LS Cable and System, Furukawa. Those are some of the really big ones. They have the technology, the manufacturing scale, the global reach.
And also smaller regional players.
Yes, alongside those giants, you have other established companies and some more specialized or regional ones listed too, like ZTT, KEI Industries, Telefonica Cable, Hengtong, and several others. Innovation and project execution capability are key differentiators.
Has there been much movement recently? Mergers, acquisitions?
The report notes a couple of examples. Nexans acquired a Finnish company, Reka Kapeli Oy, fairly recently. And a bit further back, Prysmian completed its merger with General Cable.
So some consolidation happening?
Yeah, which is pretty typical in these kinds of capital-intensive established industries. Companies look to gain scale, technology, or market access.
Okay, finally, let's look at how the report segments the market itself. First, by the type of cable.
Right, it breaks it down into single-core and multi-core cables. Currently, single-core holds the larger share.
Why is that?
The report suggests it's often down to cost effectiveness for certain applications, maybe lower voltage needs like connecting offshore oil and gas platforms, or some simpler inter-country links.
Okay. And multi-core.
Multi-core cables are flagged as the fastest growing segment by type.
And that's driven by?
Primarily offshore wind, which often needs multiple conductors plus integrated fibers for control and communication, all bundled into one robust cable. Also, the need for higher capacity data transmission plays a role here too.
Got it. So single core leads now, but multi-core is growing faster. What about segmenting by application? Where are these cables actually being used?
The main applications highlighted are offshore wind power generation, intercountry and island connection, and then offshore oil rigs.
And the biggest slice of the pie goes to?
Offshore wind power generation. That's currently the largest application segment by market share.
No surprise there, given everything we've discussed about renewables.
Exactly. It directly reflects the huge global investment in harnessing wind power out at sea. These projects simply can't happen without submarine cables.
And we already know intercountry and island connection is the fastest growing application overall.
That's right. Rapidly expanding as grids become more interconnected for reliability and renewable integration. Offshore oil rigs use these cables too, but it's currently a smaller part of the market compared to wind and interconnectors.
Okay, great. So pulling this all together from our deep dive into the report, it paints a picture of a market, submarine power cables, that's really dynamic and set for significant growth.
Absolutely. The key drivers are unmistakable. The massive build-out of offshore wind energy globally, and this increasing need to link up power grids across borders and to islands.
Driven by the energy transition and the need for resilient networks.
Precisely. There are challenges, of course, the high costs, the environmental and regulatory hurdles, but the underlying trends are strong.
And technological advancements like HVDC are helping enable these bigger, longer projects.
Yes, along with the general demand for connectivity, both for power and data, it creates a really potent environment for continued growth and innovation in this sector.
It really feels like these underwater arteries are becoming absolutely essential to the future global energy system.
Which leads to a really interesting question for you to think about. As we rely more and more on renewable energy sources, often located offshore, and on these international grid connections that submarine cables make possible, what kind of breakthroughs in materials or installation techniques might be needed next? What could further revolutionize the reach, the resilience, the sheer capability of these vital underwater power lines?
A fascinating thought to end on. What's the next leap forward? Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.